Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the plains for what is now my favourite habitat on this channel. I know that's going to start sounding a little bit insincere the more I say it, but it's true. Prepare yourselves for a double dam special and decide who does it better, us or today's species, the beaver. Today's habitat has been in my head since I opened this zoo. I've been working towards it from day one. I now have no concrete plans for this location beyond today. There's no plan, unfortunately. I kind of drew out a general overview including the basic outline and position of this habitat last week as part of the river plan. Nevertheless, I shall give you a rundown of my vision as soon as we've taken care of the YouTube admin. Before we get too far into today's video, if you enjoy today's build as much as I do, likes are always appreciated. For much more on the way, you can of course subscribe and head to the comments to leave your suggestions for today's beavers. And remember, only appropriate names will be chosen. I don't care how funny it is, so feel free to make your jokes, but don't be surprised when your innuendo doesn't make it into next week's video. Now, we've had some suggestions for last week's alligators. In first is Sean with our big male, Arlo. And our first female, Quagawump. And with the name for our next female, it's Lisa again. Say hello to Daisy. Thank you for leaving your suggestions. We still have a couple of females to name, so feel free to add more for future videos. At some point I'll go through all of the late names in one big video, so they'll all get the recognition they deserve. Okay, to today's video. I created this pool separating the two levels of the river with a small island in the centre. This was always the plan for this habitat, as I wanted to make a proper beaver dam and have it affect the river throughout. This is why the lower part, where the alligators are, is slightly narrower, slightly shallower, as if the water level has dropped from where it used to be. And the higher part is much wider, where the water has been stopped and allowed to fill up. I did consider having the river in two, instead of having this pool set in the middle and just having the beavers in the wider section up top. But this kind of isolated slice of woodland seemed more picturesque, and it meant that I had a straightforward means of blocking off the upstream side of the habitat, besides using another chain link fence through the water. Obviously, this was all designed specifically so I could create a proper beaver dam, which, despite only having a few sticks to start with, was surprisingly simple, if very expensive. Not the smartest move to spend tens of thousands on bundles of twigs and tree trunks when the beavers would have been able to do it for free. But that is the cost of animal welfare. Call it a speed tax. The dam was so expensive I had to take a break to build a barrier around the rest of the habitat and let the animals loose in order to start generating some money off of them as soon as possible. So, they were living for a little while in a work in progress. The beavers, incidentally, are being relocated from a river slightly to the north of us, close to the Canadian border, where they were starting to interfere with some of the natural ecosystem. Beavers can be great for some environments. They can prevent downstream flooding, protect upstream ecosystems from drought, reduce erosion of rivers, filter pollutants from farming or industry. They're incredible natural infrastructure, but in the wrong place, they can also cause all sorts of havoc. Basically just the same reasons, but in reverse. They can cause downstream water shortages, upstream flooding or waterlogging creating marshlands, and depending on other species they can block migration access for some fish and then as a result reduce the food for some predatory animals like bears. So whether beavers in your areas are positive or negative really depends on a variety of factors. But the same could be said for man-made dams, so it's an issue we should be familiar with. This is moving away from the build a little bit, but beavers are actually being reintroduced to the UK at the moment, in some places, which has caused a little bit of a mixed reaction from people. I would like to think that the animals are being introduced to carefully selected areas that could benefit from their activity, so I see it as a bit of a positive. We have a few nice species in the UK, but most have been wiped out. If you've watched the Highland Reserve series, you'll see the limited variety of species that we have to offer. It'd be nice to bring some of them back safely. I've also heard that may happen for the Eurasian lynx as well, which may receive slightly more pushback from the locals, but as predators go, not the worst thing to reintroduce. We could have wolves and bears running free too, which personally I would approve of, but I can see why some people might have their reservations. Returning to the reason we're all here, I love the idea of a pool with a small island in the middle and the river stretching out in either direction on both sides. However, that does present a bit of a challenge for the keepers. Now they will tell you that they cannot traverse water. Sure, I wouldn't want to have to trek through this just to clean poo from some rocks either. But we do need keepers over the other side that is in clearest view of the guests at some point to tidy it up a bit. So I made a walkway set on top of some logs through the middle of the pool. Not the most stable of access, it's a bit of a balancing act, but my first thought was to leave them floating, so they should be thankful for my mercy. That would be if they didn't walk through the water beside it instead of across the top of them like their traversable area says they should be able to. So the thing I made so you wouldn't need to get wet is being used as a handrail while you trudge through the water anyway. Sure, that makes perfect sense. It's not just the guests that have questionable intelligence in this place. The Beaver Dam. Well, it's kind of hard to see what's going on really. There are a lot of sticks in a lot of directions, but comparing it to some photos of real dams, there was something missing. You may see that I'm putting in straw roof pieces into the branches, just so that it peeks through under the top layer of them. In a lot of pictures, in addition to the wood from the branches and logs, there's usually a lot of softer packing material, like grasses. I would assume this is to make it a bit more watertight, as otherwise there would be plenty of little holes for the water to escape through. These roofs were the closest thing to that sort of material that were available. And actually, it really does add something to the final structure, even if it's just a splash of something other than white. Returning to the design of the habitat, the guest view for this is not great if the beavers are on the other bank. However, hopefully I've added enough food and enrichment to the clearing to encourage more activity beneath the window. I had a vision of one of those big, ugly, modern concrete buildings that's all angular and artistic, but set in the middle of a woodland with big bay windows looking down over a peaceful little glade where the beavers live. Thankfully I will tone down the concrete in the actual build, but I really like the idea of that sort of semi-circular viewing gallery looking down over the area, so the beavers aren't disturbed or in too close a proximity to the guests. Maybe this would have been a better idea for the bears or something, you know. Something bigger, more impressive that would have been showcased with this kind of viewing. The beavers aren't exactly a showstopper species, but they do have a pretty great and unique habitat. Now my plan was to go heavy on the foliage here, and less on the rocks, which I think I achieved eventually, but there were bits of the old obsessive Trondheim Vidar poking through in places, so expect some rock work regardless. I suppose if anything is going to give my PC the lags, it was going to be the mountain of twigs though. Anyway, the foliage. As I mentioned last week, the whole river needs to feel like a continuation. There will be some differences in biome, but for the most part it will have a natural evolution from one end to the other. This is going to be the densest part of the woodland area right here, which will thin out in a radius. Probably still quite thick for next week's episode, but then we're back to the grasslands and the wetland area for the remainder of the zoo. If you're like me, then you've never tried chewing through the base of a tree. If you have tried it, I'm willing to bet those pearly whites you flash when you get your picture taken are not the ones that you grew yourself. A beaver's front teeth are more like a carpenter's chisel than the food smashers we're familiar with, to the point where they're even infused with a higher iron content, making them a literal woodworking tool. It also makes them bright orange, the kind of colour your old garden furniture goes after a few years of rain and cold and starts to rust. One of nature's amazing little adaptations that makes you think about those first ancestors that started chewing wood with their normal teeth and wonder why they carried on to begin with. Now, I could move on to marvel at the incredible feats of engineering these animals are capable of, building dams up to 850 meters long in rivers that are still flowing, not diverted or stopped somehow. They're fighting the current when they build. I could talk about how perfectly adapted they are for underwater construction, their third eyelids or air seals and lung capacity. But no, I found something far more interesting to talk about. Beavers have a set of scent glands under their tails that produce a vanilla-scented molasses that was used, I don't know if it still is or how much, but it was used for perfume and food. Hopefully that doesn't ruin vanilla for you, but let's be real for a moment. If your pet secreted a nice vanilla scent from its anus, would that be a good thing or a bad thing? Think about that. And would you want to know if your perfume was filled with beaver butt juice? We only pose the hard-hitting questions here. Dams, whether man-made or beaver-made, need to let in some water. Unfortunately, we only have certain widths of waterfall effects, so it was tricky to have one or two specific points where it was managing to get through. But pushed in deep enough, it does give a less aggressive flow effect. Although I suppose if the whole river was trying to push through a couple of small holes, it would be quite forceful. Now, as I mentioned, the guest viewing window is kind of a modern concrete art piece that I'd planned to act as a hard shelter for the beavers as well, although that didn't pan out. I think it was too high and too shallow to prevent the rain, but no matter. I went back and forth a little bit on whether to add a covered guest area as well to this, to add to that woodland getaway feel. And at this point I was squarely in the back camp, so I made it without. Later on though, I will move over to the fourth camp and add one as well. The viewing gallery looks, I think, quite stylish. Not that I would know. Especially once the covered area goes on a bit later as well. But it is extremely simple. If you look really closely, you can see it's very roughly made. It's not very polished at all. But that's only because when you arrive here, the whole area is eventually going to be covered in woodland. As you walk in, your main focus is not going to be on the rough floors or the dodgy corners. It's also not going to be on just the beaver dam, but the man-made dam. That's right. Double dams. The best of both worlds, as Miley Cyrus might say. This was never a second dam in my plans until I started making a barrier around the top of the enclosure and realised, obviously, it has to be a dam. I was literally just going to have a wall there. Thankfully, the difference between a wall and a dam is small, so it could be adapted with ease. I'm actually very happy with the details on it. I've added pipes to the backside at the water level, so the water only passes through it when it reaches that height. And then I added a similar thing on the front, with channels to guide the falling water into the pool, and even made the wall pieces slightly darker where the water is, so that it looks wet, obviously. On the whole, quite a successful building video, I think. 1 habitat, 2 dams, the most unique environment of any of the zoos so far. And with that, I have used up all my words for the day. There's a little bit left in the build, and then those all-important scenic shots, so be sure to stick around if you've made it this far, and remember to comment your suggestions for the names of these beavers. Thank you all for watching. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, all that good stuff. Have a great week, and I will see you again in the next one.